The road to economic recovery remains challenging, to say the least. The government reported a net loss of 125,000 jobs in the U.S. last month. The unemployment rate did fall to 9.5% in June from 9.7% in May, but that is because more people dropped out of the workforce. As for private payrolls, the Labor Department reported an 83,000 increase, but that was much less than forecast. Joining us now is an economist who's been warning about the weak job market and fragile economy since mid-2008. Now he says the risks are rising and that we'll have another recession. Mark Zandi is chief economist at Moody's Analytics, and he joins us now. Mark, thank you so much for spending some time with us today. Unfortunately, it's obviously very depressing news to discuss, and it's actually sort of worse than we expected, even though the headline number may be 5,000 better than I guess the revisions were last night. Where's this jobs market going? Will it continue to sort of go down the tubes here?
Well, I think that's too strong, Matt. I mean, I think that the job market is losing momentum, and I don't think it's factored in yet the ill effects of what's happened to the stock market and what's happening to retailing. So we'll still see continued soft job numbers, I think, through most of the summer and fall. I am hopeful that with some good policy making and a little bit of luck by late this year, early next, that those better profits that businesses are seeing will entice them to go out and start hiring a bit more aggressively. But at this point, that's more hope than reality.
You know, Mark, we talked with Barton Biggs, who's definitely become much more negative about the equity market. He is concerned about a policy mistake being made here. I mean, what do we have to do in terms of policy to right the economy, in your view?
Well, I think the onus now is on fiscal policymakers, and I think it's important for them to continue to provide significant support to the economy. And more specifically, I think that would include extending emergency UI benefits. As you know, those benefits have expired, and several 100,000 people a week are now running off those rolls, and I think that is a mistake. And moreover, I think it would be also important for policymakers to provide some additional help to state and local governments, because if they don't get more help, the budget cutting, the job losses, the tax increases will come at the wrong time for this fragile recovery.
Listen, Mark, you know, you've testified in front of Congress. You talked to the government about what they should and shouldn't do. Have you recommended any specific policy moves here?
Yeah, so I have. I was in the front of the House Budget Committee yesterday, and I did recommend extending emergency UI and helping to help fill the budget hole for state and local governments. And one additional thing, I think it is important for policymakers to come up with more money to help the Small Business Administration to provide more credit to small business, because small businesses are key to the job machine. If they can't get credit, they can't hire. One other point, I do think policy uncertainty is a problem. I mean, if talking to business people, many of whom are my clients, I think they are nervous about all of the policy debates and policy decisions that are being made. They're important, and we need to engage in these discussions, but I do think it's now time for policymakers to put some of these things to rest and give some certainty to business people so that they will go out and hire.
Mark, you mentioned, extending those unemployment benefits. Let me ask you, what about more stimulus? Do we need another structured, large stimulus program?
No, I don't think so. Not at this point. I think if we provide those UI benefits, if we do more help to state and local governments, if we provide more credit to small business, you tote that up. That's not cheap. That's still pretty expensive. But I think that would be sufficient to tide us over to the time and point in time when the private sector really kicks in.
So you're not worried at all about us becoming another Japan, or are you?
I think if we go back into recession, if policymakers aren't aggressive and we do fall back into recession, then a Japanese-like scenario is very possible. So it is very important that we don't go down that path, and therefore prudent risk management would suggest that policymakers should err on the side of doing too much rather than too little, because the Japanese scenario is certainly something that could happen if we do backslide.
What do you think about tax policy? Because obviously we've got to pay for this spending somehow, and it seems that this administration favors a higher tax policy, or at least not renewing the Bush tax cuts in 2011. Is that the right move? Do they have to do that?
Well, my view is that to address the fiscal situation, the focus has to be on restrained spending. Now, it's got to be a combination of restrained spending and tax increases, but most of the heavy lifting has to come from restrain spending. Not this year, certainly, not even next year, but 2012 and beyond, when the economy is off and running and the coast is clear and we're growing in a consistent, solid way, then I do think spending restraint and some tax increases would be appropriate.
You know, Obama went to the G20 with a message that growth is the best way, obviously, to fix deficits in the end. Wouldn't cutting taxes spur more growth if you want to end up cutting the deficits in the end? I mean, don't increases sort of stump that?
Well, tax cuts are good, and there have been lots of tax cuts as part of the stimulus, as you know, and there are still tax cuts in place. I mean, making work pay is still in place. There's a jobs tax credit, which is a payroll tax holiday for businesses that go out and hire unemployed workers. So there is net loss carryback provisions that are in place through the end of the year. We just had the housing tax credit, which is a tax cut, which just expired. So there are a lot of tax cuts that are in place. I think at this point, we need to do those three things I mentioned, and I think that'll be good enough to get us through this tricky period.
All right, time will certainly tell. Hey, Mark, Zandi, thank you so much. Have a good weekend.